resident clown of pretty much everything I did for all of my growing up. I can think of about a dozen examples that I could cite specifically of this basic type of scenario unfolding. The coach or the teacher or mom or dad or whoever is yelling at somebody for getting something wrong, but they're saying it in real funny ways like a drill sergeant would. And then I'm standing down the row a little bit and I'm like, that's kind of funny. Because it's kind of funny. And then the coach or the teacher, the parent or the drill sergeant, I wasn't in the military, so it wasn't, well, my grandpa was a drill sergeant. Maybe in this case it was. They'd come down and be like, you think that's funny, Mr. Whitman? And I'd be like, oh, no, I mean, maybe, sort of. I'm not sure what the correct answer is. And they'd be like, oh, no. So-and-so over here, they're in trouble for doing this thing, but don't think for a minute that you're not going to get it too because I know what you did. And in Matthew chapter 11, I kind of imagine all the people of Chorazin and Bethsaida who were standing there while Jesus is yelling at them and saying, woe to you, because they saw the miracles of Jesus and the kingdom's right in front of their faces, and they were like, not into it, I'm not going to do it. And they're standing there, and maybe they kind of felt bad, like if nothing else, maybe they had the social sense to hang their heads and not make eye contact with him. And then right on down the line, there's Capernaum, and they're like, because you got to figure, Chorazin, Bethsaida, they're probably like, big-time football rivals with Capernaum, and they always rooted against each other and complained about how dumb the other towns were. And now Capernaum finally gets a leg up, and Jesus goes into all of this stuff about how even Tyre and Sidon, are you kidding me? That's the towns that produced Jezebel. Even they would have got it if they'd seen what you guys have seen, Chorazin and Bethsaida. And then Capernaum's like, and then Jesus is like, what was that? You think that's pretty funny, Capernaum? No, I thought I heard you laugh. Did I hear you laugh? And Capernaum's like, what? Yes, Son of God. Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize. And Jesus is like, no, you're not getting off the hook. That is more or less exactly what the text today says, but I'll just read it to you as a formality anyway. But no, I mean, that's just pretty much precise from memory. Here's the exact version. Matthew 11:20. Then Jesus began to denounce the cities in which most of his miracles had been performed because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! If the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. And then that's the end of verse 22. And then imagine a verse 22 and a half that goes like this. And then Capernaum was like, verse 23, and you, Capernaum, will you be lifted up to the skies? Oh, no. No, you will go down to the depths. If the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. But I tell you that it will be more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment than for you. And so what's really entertaining about this is that Capernaum is standing there and they're all smug because Jesus took the second most deplorable metaphor, epitome of horribleness, civilization, and said, these guys are doing better than you, Chorazin and Bethsaida. And while Capernaum is giggling about that, then Jesus turns around to them and is like, oh yeah, but you, I tell you what, the worst civilization, the epitome of the absolute worst, even they would have got it if they'd seen the things that you had seen. So, ouch. Everybody just comes out looking bad. It was probably a huge bummer. Not a lot of high fives at the end of this little speech. But it's really telling about the relationship between the two, and maybe even it helps us get behind the text a little bit, where we talked a couple days ago about how Chorazin and Bethsaida were flyover country in the minds of the gospel authors because they just didn't record anything save two quick miracles that happened in either of these towns. Yet so much apparently happened there that Jesus was willing to say, you guys have plenty of data. You should be able to get this. So then we stack that up against Capernaum, and whoa, okay, well, we actually have a pretty good sense biblically of how much stuff happened at Capernaum. Let me just come back over here and remember the Sermon on the Mount, right? Jesus comes off of that mountain, and when he finished saying all these things, this is Matthew 7, last verses of Matthew 7. When Jesus finished saying all these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. And then the beginning of chapter 8, it said, when he came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came, and then the leprosy thing, and then the centurion happens next, and then Peter's mother-in-law, and then the disciples were like, I'll follow you anywhere. And Jesus is like, no, you probably actually won't because I'm homeless. And then we don't know if they do. And then he demonstrates his authority over the stuff in the boat and the demons. And all of this stuff, except for the stuff that happens in the boat and the stuff that happens with the demons, all of chapter 8 is in Capernaum. And then we also get this in-between-the-lines stuff about how much Capernaum would have seen. So, verse 14 of chapter 8, when Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law. We talked about that a second ago. She's laying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and carried our diseases. I mean, those little verses feel like they're just throwaway things when you're breezing by them in the moment. But then you go back when you get a little further ahead and the text has given you a new question to unpack, and you realize, whoa, those little throwaway verses are not throwaway verses. If Capernaum is the worst because they get compared to Sodom, and Capernaum has seen, therefore, more than anybody else, and they really should get it, it's important that we get these little details in here in chapter 8 and chapter 9 about all that happened. But why the denunciation? I mean, it seems like people are actually coming up and they're having miraculous things done. It seems like Peter's mother-in-law assumed a right position before the king. Jesus does this miracle. She gets up and she starts serving the king. I mean, that's perfect. That's textbook Jesusism, exactly what he's teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. So what exactly is the problem? Well, that becomes a little more clear when we get over to chapter 9. All the people are gathered around, the teachers of the law are kind of grumbling, and that paralytic gets brought in. From Luke, we learn that he was lowered through the ceiling, and then Jesus has a showdown with them about forgiveness. That turns ugly, guys. Because remember, this is the thing where they're like, I don't want you forgiving people. We don't want you saying things like, take heart, son, your sins are forgiven. Like, just do your monkey healing routine and let's get on with it here. No, this is a serious confrontation that sets the leadership of Capernaum at odds with Jesus. And maybe part of the reason that Capernaum is getting unique demerits here is because there's actually a synagogue in Capernaum. I've been there. It's really cool looking. You can go there. The one that you'll see there is remodeled and built over the top of the one that was there when Jesus was there. But no, there was already a very solid foothold of rabbinical, pharisaical, Jewish leadership in Capernaum at the time, and they had a pretty tight grip on the place. And none of these miracles in this tiny little town you could practically throw a football from one end to the other of are going to go unnoticed by them. So they are threatened, they are present, they are the rulers, they're the people who run the town. Well, it gets a little bit weirder yet when Jesus then goes on to call Matthew the tax collector, and Matthew only has bad friends, so he invites his bad friends to celebrate that his life has been changed, and the religious leaders, again, presumably all of whom were attached to that synagogue and were the leaders not just religiously, but the leaders of the town, the representatives of the town, they don't like it, and they're throwing a fit about who Jesus is hanging out with. Jesus makes contact with a lady who has a bleeding problem in Matthew chapter 9. All of this is going down in the same neck of the woods, and all of this is driving a wedge between Jesus, who is doing kingdom stuff, and the Pharisees who are doing chump stuff. And so when we get to chapter 11, we have more than enough data to fill in here to be like, okay, even though Jesus operated out of Capernaum, and even though a lot of people responded positively to Jesus while he was working in Capernaum, the leadership, the people who speak for the town, were not responding positively. They were responding very negatively. And if we compile what we get from the other three Gospels, we figure out they are already pretty invested in the idea of seeing Jesus punished or even killed. So this rivalry is real. And what Jesus is doing is like, I showed up and I didn't do it like John the Baptist, who your leaders complained about because he did it too weird. I showed up, I hung out with normal people in a normal town where normal things happen, and you guys were mad about that too. I did miracles in front of Bethsaida, I did miracles in front of Chorazin, I did miracles in front of Capernaum. Chorazin, Bethsaida, you guys should have seen enough to know. You should have had enough background to have tracked with what was happening, but you didn't, and that makes you attached to the second worst civilization everybody can think of. But Capernaum? Come on, guys. This is happening right in front of your face at a level that is different than just about any other level that has ever happened in all of history, save maybe like the Exodus, the parting of the water. So I know there are a bunch of you here listening who would say, yeah, I think there's a God behind the Bible, and I guess to whatever degree I believe in this. I'm, wrestling and trying to figure it out, but if I'm in or I'm out, well, then definitely count me as in. But my guess would be that you've never seen 1/1000th of what the people of Capernaum saw, and yet you're in. Wow, that's pretty cool. I mean, it makes you better than Sodom. I guess it's not really that high of praise. But there are also some of you who are sitting here listening, I don't know, you're wrestling it through too, and right now you're in a place where you would say, I'm interested in the Bible. I'd like to understand my religious friends better. I like hanging out with all of you who do this thing, but I don't think there's necessarily a God behind the text. All right, well, first, I continue to be amazed and appreciative of every one of you who are here, who are coming at it that way. But second, I don't know, is this risky of me to say? Like, maybe you have more of an excuse for having questions and not being in at this point than the people of Capernaum. I mean, I would like to think that the fair-minded people who I've met from around the internet, and admittedly not everybody is fair-minded around the internet, but the fair-minded, data-driven people I've met from around the internet, I mean, come on. If they'd seen the stuff, if you had seen the stuff that Capernaum saw, I think it probably would have been enough for you based on the way you're wired. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I would have been with all the chumps who saw this stuff happen and found some weird explanation like they always did in the X-Files where it's like, that's obviously an alien. Like, no, it's swamp gas. No, look at his claws and his weird face. It's clearly an alien. No, I think it was magnets or mirrors or a weather balloon. It's an alien. And maybe they had some equivalent of weather balloons or swamp gas back then that they could use to talk themselves out of seeing overtly supernatural things. But whatever the case, the bottom line is the same. Jesus expresses something that I am not qualified to express, that I am not interested in or even tempted to creep up to the boundary line of and try to express myself. And that is wholesale condemnation of a community. If he's God and he's right about everything and he is appointed to judge all the nations and to sort everything out and all of his judgments are right, he can say this stuff. And then the thing that we take from it is not, oh, wow, as a Bible reader, I see, well, that when towns behave badly, Jesus condemns them. And what is my number one mantra for how to read the Bible? I'll just look at this rubber bracelet. What would Jesus do? He would judge them and condemn them all. Therefore, I'll judge and condemn everyone. No! This is not a what would Jesus do situation. This is look at the authority of the king on display, the authority of a king who is smart enough to know not just what people did, but what people would have done under different circumstances, and to calculate that all into his judgment. No courtroom can do that. No government can do that. No friend can do that. No angry commenter on Twitter can do that. We will always get this kind of judgment wrong. But we're learning something in the text here about how different God is, how different Jesus is. The text holds him out as being qualified to make these counterfactual judgments as though they are a matter of fact. Tomorrow we'll break down more about what that counterfactual concept means. Thanks for hanging out with me. We'll do more of this tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.